that wears a uniform get ready. Well, what is the president preparing the American public for this morning?
Well, he said so himself, Paula, in 3 simple words, but 3 words that underscore the enormity of this situation and the challenge facing the president and the United States of America. We're at war. That the President of the United States. He has called this an act of war against the United States, but today, around the table with his national security team, debating what we are told by sources, specific military options, the President of the United States saying we're at war. Also in there, an echo of 4 words spoken by his father a little more than a decade ago in assembling the coalition for the Persian Gulf War. Mr. Bush saying, "This will not stand." Those are the exact words spoken by his father when he was mobilizing not only the U.S. military, but an international coalition to go to war against the government of Iraqi President Saddam Hussein. Very significant here, the stern shift in the president's language in recent days. He's sitting around the table up there at Camp David with the vice president and his national security advisors. And to the point you were making at the beginning, the Taliban threat against any neighbors who cooperate with the United States. You heard Secretary of State Powell in that discussion confirm on the record what we reported yesterday. The government of Pakistan. Pakistan is Afghanistan's neighbor. Pakistan has now promised to fully cooperate with the United States. Secretary Powell would not say specifically what that meant, but we are told by sources that includes an agreement to close down the border with Afghanistan, and it includes, most significantly, a promise to allow the U.S. military to use Pakistani airspace if the United States government goes ahead with military strikes. We want to take you back now to that room, the briefing room up there at Camp David, where the president is meeting with his national security team for some additional comments. We'll begin with Secretary of State Colin Powell.
We should also take note it's not just Americans who lost lives in the World Trade Centers. Dozens of countries lost lives, and they realized that this was an attack against them as well. So we're receiving expressions of support from around the world, and not just rhetorical support, but real support for whatever may lay ahead in this campaign that is ahead of us to win the war that the President has spoken of. I might especially want to thank the President and the people of Pakistan for the support that they have offered and their willingness to assist us in whatever might be required in that part of the world as we determine who these perpetrators are. It's a coalition that will stay intact, that will be built upon over time, and what we have to do is not just go after these perpetrators and those who gave them haven, but the whole curse of terrorism that is upon the face of the earth. And this is a campaign that we have begun this week, and we will stick with it until we are successful.
Attorney General.
4 days ago, we began an investigative effort to understand not only those who perpetrate this heinous assault against America and free people everywhere, but to develop an understanding of those who are associated with it and how it was conducted. The FBI, together with very cooperative local and state officials and law enforcement agencies, has processed thousands of leads. We are making the kinds of contacts and developing the information that allow us to describe this as proceeding with reasonable success. And we believe that the picture is developing a kind of clarity that's appropriate. We've named 19 individuals that we have high levels of confidence were the hijackers, and we are further refining our understanding of the ways in which this terrible crime was developed. I might add that we have put in place very serious measures that we believe will provide greater security and provide a basis for our country returning to the kind of freedom and business and conduct that is characteristic of this great nation.
If you're wondering why we are showing you split images now, because obviously what Attorney General John Ashcroft has to say is very important, but if you check out the right part of your screen, we showed former President Clinton, Senator Hillary Clinton, their daughter Chelsea, entering a funeral that is being held in honor of New York City's fire department chaplain. This is an extremely sad story. The chaplain was actually doing last rites for a firefighter who had been injured in the wake of this tragedy at the World Trade Center. And then the chaplain himself lost his life during the collapse of one of the towers. people all over the country, I think, are deeply affected by this, because we know, John, that the first folks into this area were the firefighters. John King is back with us. I wanted to go back to the substance of what the president had to say earlier on. What else did you make of the significance of like you said, the turned up language? The heat was turned up today by the president.
Well, the president faces a very difficult challenge here. There's no doubt he has the support of the American people for some form of military retaliation. The question is, how long will that support last? And specifically, given the experience of the Clinton administration when it targeted Osama bin Laden, if the president decides in this case not to use cruise missiles, which proved ineffective, but to actually use any ground forces in Afghanistan against Osama bin Laden, who the president himself today called the prime suspect, will the American people support that, knowing full well there could be casualties? So the president's saying we're at war. The president's saying this will not stand. He's saying the enemy is hiding, but we will smoke it out, we will find it, and we will bring them to justice. And then you heard Secretary of State Colin Powell, again, part of this effort to prepare the American people for what lies ahead, saying this will be a sustained campaign and we will stick with it. So very significant, tough rhetoric from the administration today, especially to help put it into context, because we know from our sources this meeting today is designed to narrow down the military options.
John, I know you heard the same report I did from Nick Robertson this morning from Kabul, Afghanistan, where he said it is a belief there that Osama bin Laden, who the president declared as the prime suspect today, is still there, but he's elusive. He moves from, cave to cave, hole to hole. How challenging of a campaign will this be?
Well,
if,
we know from...
in fact, they, isolated Osama bin Laden as the main person responsible for these attacks.
Your emphasis on the if is a well-put emphasis, because we must make clear the president just called him the prime suspect. The administration has yet to act. The Attorney General did say also there was clarity in the investigation, so there's no question the administration increasingly turning toward a campaign against the organization of Osama bin Laden. We know from our sources dating back at least 3 years there have been plans in the military, various contingencies for dealing with the bin Laden organization. Some of them call for dropping paratroopers and other troops into Afghanistan to look for him and to look for his organization and to try to damage and destroy his camps and bases. So the president, in looking at his options, yes, the United States could and has in the past used cruise missiles. There could be other aerial assaults. I spoke to a senior official the other day involved in the military planning who said it's not like we can bomb Afghanistan and get bin Laden. We would have to go in and get him for this to be effective. The president himself saying he's not interested in a token signal. The translation of that is, sure, we could go in and strike with missiles or bombs, but what would we get for it is what the administration has been debating. That is the debate among the president's senior advisors. So very stern language today. We're at war. You don't hear a president say that. And so this president now preparing for the very likely possibility that he might have to use ground troops as part of any U.S. military operation. Paula?
John, I got a lot more questions for you, and we're going to come back to you after this brief interlude with Brian Nelson, our correspondent, who is joining us from that funeral you see unfolding on the right part of your screen for the New York City's Fire Department chaplain who was killed, in fact, during the process of administering last rites to a firefighter who had fallen. His name was Michael Judge, and Brian Nelson gives us a better idea now of what is happening at this moment. Brian?
Thank you, Paula. This is a really sad and a poignant moment here. I'm in front of 24 looking ahead her. This is in Midtown Manhattan, and beside us is the Church of St. Francis of Assisi, and this is the funeral for, as you said, Father Michael Judge. He was the chaplain for the New York City Fire Department for 10 years. He was 68 years old, and he was the first chaplain to die in the line of duty. Now, according to people who know him well, he was a chaplain who was known far and wide outside the city of New York. But to the firemen of the city of New York, he ministered to their personal problems. He talked to them about marital problems, alcohol problems, problems with their kids. He was very close to so many people, especially those in front of a 24 hook and ladder, which just happened to be across the street from the Church of St. Francis Assisi. And with me now is Brother Ed Coughlin. He is from the church, and brother, you knew the father well.
I was one of the Franciscans that lived here in the St. Francis Friary with Father Michael.
Tell us about him.
I think the best way I could describe him, he was your ultimate Irishman from Brooklyn, a warm, loving personality. And at the wake service last night, many people said everyone that met him felt like they were his best friend. And people have come from far and wide, internationally even, to be here because they felt that he touched their lives very deeply. And over many, many years, people just felt they had to come because he was a friend of theirs and was so present to them, so loving to them. It's like the firemen. He always went to their families and tried to be there for them.
He was a chaplain that seemed to go out of the way beyond the line of duty.
Yeah, his duty really began after the tragedies or after the fire was put out in some ways. He continued to minister to the families, and so many of the firemen and different people who have come here have talked about Michael being present to them and helping them through hard times when someone was killed or injured.
Tell us about the day of the tragedy, if you have any knowledge about it, when that call came in about the firemen at the site of the World Trade Center having been fatally injured, and what happened then?
Actually, Bishop Mercado called Father Peter, who's the guardian here, and I went with Father Peter down to St. Peter's Church. The fireman who found his body laid him on a body board and took him to St. Peter's Church and laid him in front of the altar, covered him with a sheet and laid a stole over that and put his badge on top of him. And when we got there, in the middle of all that, some of the firemen were already coming in to pay their respects to Father Mike.
I take it nobody was surprised that he had rushed down there.
No, I was in the house in the morning of the accident, and as soon as anything got to that proportion, Michael was gone in a moment, and these guys across the street, where this was his firehouse, and oftentimes he was on the street in his habit talking to the guys across the street, and one of them drove him down there, and I believe the man died with him, and so 6 of the men from across the street also died in the tragedy, and those are Michael's men, and the whole fire hood is a real brotherhood, and I think Michael's Franciscan Brotherhood, there was a real link there in terms of the connecting of the two, in terms of real warmth of friendship and care, and the body was actually brought back here to the firehouse for transport to the morgue, and the guys received him with great reverence. And
he was also a man known for great charity, great tolerance. I heard a story that he would go along the streets of New York and secretly slip money to the homeless, not wanting to be seen, but himself, and not very well off himself.
One of his classmates and friends, Pat Fitzgerald, who kind of describes himself as the back man or the quiet man, said they would go on these long walks at night all over the city, and Michael always had a bunch of dollar bills in his pocket to help somebody out and give them something along the way. And like I said, anybody on the street here was moved by him. The people at the hotel and people in restaurants, everyone knew Father Mike because he was always on the street, always in his habit, and he loved New York City and loved, even our morning prayer in the morning, almost every morning, he would say a special prayer for peace in the city and for safety for all the visitors, because he just thought this was the greatest place in the world, and he couldn't imagine being any other place.
Brother, thank you. And just for our viewers, just to let you know and background you what's happening here, New York is beginning to bury its dead. This is Saturday morning in New York City, and this is the first of 3 funerals today. 2 other firemen. And this is for the chaplain of the New York Fire Department and the Father Michael Judge. And he was 68 years old and was the chaplain for 10 years, and we will continue to follow this story as the very sad events here in Midtown Manhattan proceed this morning. Let's go back to you, Paula.
Thanks, Brian. And we should also note that on September 23rd, more than 1 million New Yorkers are expected to turn out for a memorial for all the folks from the fire department who have been killed, those who were killed in the initial blast, those that were killed, and going about the gruesome effort of rescue and cleanup. Right now, we're going to go back to Miles O'Brien, and I am sure your next guest, General Wesley Clark, has a very strong reaction to some of the words coming out of the White House this morning. Good morning again, Miles.
Good morning again, Paula. Yes, General Clark, who is our military advisor here at CNN, or military analyst, I guess would be more accurate, former Supreme Commander of NATO, heard what the president had to say. And let's just give folks the caveat, first of all, here, because General Clark is sensitive to this. We at CNN are sensitive to the realities that we don't want to aid or give comfort or harbor or in any way assist the enemy. Tell us what you're thinking right now.
Well, we don't want to do anything that's going to assist the enemy. We don't want to do anything that's going to make it harder for the president and his team to make these terrible decisions that they're confronting right now. But this is the time where the diplomatic work has got to be done. We're dealing with a probable organization that's headquartered in a landlocked country. And to get to it, to affect it, is going